I don't sit in the same place anymore. It's still there. The chair hasn't moved. The room hasn't changed. But something about it feels wrong now. Like it belongs to a version of me that doesn't exist anymore. I used to come home and drop into that spot without thinking. It was just part of the routine. End of the day. Noise fading out. Something familiar waiting for me. Now I walk past it. Sometimes I stand there for a second, like I'm trying to remember what it felt like to just exist in that space without questioning anything. But it doesn't come back. It's like trying to recall a dream that disappears the second you reach for it. There's this quiet that follows me around now. Not the peaceful kind. It's heavier. Like something unfinished sitting just beneath everything. And the strange part is, nothing obvious changed at first. No explosion. No moment where everything clearly broke. Just a shift I couldn't name. It started with something small. So small I almost ignored it. I probably should have, if I wanted to keep things the way they were. But once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. At the time, it didn't feel like proof. It didn't even feel like a problem. Just, out of place. Like hearing the wrong note in a song you've listened to 100 times. You don't stop the music. You just pause for a second and think, was that always there? I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was tired. That I was reading into things. That it was nothing worth holding on to. But that's the moment everything changed. Not when I found out the truth. Not when words were said or explanations were given. It changed when I noticed something didn't feel right, and instead of letting it go, I held on to it. That's a line you don't realize you're crossing. Because before that, you trust without thinking. You exist inside something that feels stable. You don't question the foundation. After that, everything gets filtered through doubt. And doubt is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It just sits there, growing, attaching itself to things that used to feel normal. A pause that lasts a second too long. A response that feels slightly off. A look that doesn't match the words. You start collecting these moments without meaning to. At least, that's what I told myself. I wasn't looking for anything. I didn't want to find anything. But there's a point where not looking becomes impossible. Where pretending something feels right takes more effort than just admitting it doesn't. And even then, I still didn't think it would lead to this. I didn't think I'd end up questioning everything. I didn't think I'd lose something I didn't even realize I was holding on to. Because what nobody tells you is, the hardest part isn't what actually happened. It's the moment you realize your version of things was never real in the first place. And once that thought settles in, it doesn't leave. It just stays there, quietly reshaping everything you thought you understood. If you've ever had that feeling, where something small starts to unravel something big, then you already know how this goes. And if you haven't, you might want to listen closely. Because the worst betrayals don't start with what's obvious. They start with something you almost ignored. Before any of this, my life felt settled. Not perfect. Not exciting in some dramatic way. Just steady. There's a kind of comfort in that. You don't notice it while you're in it, because it doesn't ask anything from you. It just exists in the background, holding everything together. That's what we had. We built something that worked. Not fast, not impulsive. It came together over time, piece by piece, until it stopped feeling like something we were building and started feeling like something that had always been there. Our days followed a rhythm. Small routines that didn't seem important on their own, but together they created this sense of certainty. You knew what to expect. You knew where you stood. And more than anything, I knew who I was in that life. I wasn't guessing. I wasn't trying to figure things out. I had a role, and it made sense to me. I was the one who stayed steady. The one who didn't overreact. The one who kept things grounded when life got messy. That wasn't something I forced, it just became who I was over time. And she fit into that world in a way that felt natural. We didn't question each other much. Not because we didn't care, but because there was nothing that seemed worth questioning. Trust wasn't something we talked about. It was just there. If she said something, I believed it. If something didn't make sense right away, I assumed there was a reasonable explanation. That's how it worked. Looking back, I think that's where part of the problem started. Not in anything she did. Not yet. In how completely I stopped considering the possibility that something could be wrong. There's a difference between trusting someone and removing the idea of doubt entirely. I didn't see that difference back then. I thought that was what a strong relationship looked like. We didn't fight much. And when we did, it didn't last. I was always quick to smooth things over. It felt like the right thing to do. Like keeping the peace mattered more than proving a point. She used to tell me I was easy to be with. At the time, I took that as a compliment. Now I'm not so sure. Because being easy to be with sometimes means you don't push back when something feels off. You don't question things that deserve to be questioned. You just adapt. And I got good at that. If she seemed distant, I told myself she was just tired. If something didn't line up, I assumed I misunderstood. If I felt something shift, I buried it before it could turn into a problem. It wasn't that I ignored things on purpose. It was more like I filtered them out. Because the alternative, believing something was wrong, didn't fit into the life I thought we had. There were responsibilities, too. Things that tied everything together in a way that made walking away feel unthinkable, even as a hypothetical. Our lives weren't separate. They were intertwined in ways that went beyond just the two of us. And that creates a kind of weight. Not pressure exactly. More like gravity. It keeps you grounded. Keeps you from drifting too far into doubt or uncertainty. You stay where you are because everything around you depends on it. I didn't feel trapped. I felt anchored. That's an important difference. Because when you're anchored, you don't look for exits. You don't imagine things falling apart. You assume you're exactly where you're supposed to be. And I believed that completely. I trusted her without hesitation. Not because she convinced me to. Not because I checked and verified things. Because it never occurred to me that I needed to. That kind of trust doesn't feel like a risk when you're inside it. It feels like security. Like something solid under your feet. But the thing about foundations is, you don't question them until something starts to crack. And even then, you don't want to believe what you're seeing. It didn't happen all at once. If it had, I think it would have been easier to deal with. You could point to something clear. A moment. A reason. Something you could hold on to and say, that's where it started. But this wasn't like that. It was quieter. At first, it was just a feeling I couldn't explain. Not strong enough to act on. Not even strong enough to fully acknowledge. Just something that sat in the background, like static you only notice when everything else goes quiet. There were small things. Nothing you could call out without sounding unreasonable. A shift in tone. Not colder, just different. Responses that felt slightly delayed, like there was a pause where there didn't used to be one. Not long enough to question, just long enough to notice. I told myself it didn't mean anything. People change. Moods change. Life gets in the way. That's what I kept coming back to. There was always a logical explanation if I wanted one. And I did want one. Because the alternative didn't make sense. We weren't that kind of couple. At least, that's what I believed. So every time something felt off, I adjusted. I filled in the gaps myself. If she seemed distracted, I assumed she had something on her mind. If she pulled back slightly, I told myself I was overreading it. It became automatic. I didn't even realize I was doing it at first. It was like my brain was protecting something I wasn't ready to question yet. But the feeling didn't go away. It just changed shape. It started showing up in moments that should have felt normal. Sitting next to each other, but something felt disconnected. Conversations that used to flow now felt slightly forced, like we were both following a script we hadn't written. Nothing obvious. Nothing dramatic. Just a subtle shift I couldn't ignore forever. And the more I noticed it, the harder it became to pretend it wasn't there. That's when the internal argument started. I'd catch myself thinking something was off, and then immediately shut it down. You're overthinking. You're tired. This is nothing. I repeated those thoughts enough times that they almost felt true. Almost. Because underneath all of it, there was this quiet resistance. A part of me that didn't fully believe the explanations I was giving myself. And that part didn't speak loudly. It just waited. Waited for something else to confirm what it already suspected. I still wasn't looking for anything. That's the part one keep coming back to. I didn't go searching for proof. I wasn't trying to catch anything. If anything, I was doing the opposite. I was trying to keep things the same. Trying to protect the version of reality that made sense to me. But then there was that moment. It was small. So small that if you described it to someone else, they'd probably shrug it off. I almost did. It wasn't a discovery. Not really. More like, something out of place. Something that didn't belong where it was. I remember noticing it and just staring at it for a second longer than I should have. Trying to decide if it meant anything. Trying to convince myself it didn't. Because if it did, then everything else I'd been ignoring suddenly mattered. All those small moments. All those explanations. They'd start lining up in a way I wasn't ready to see. So I told myself to let it go. To move on. To not turn something insignificant into something bigger than it was. And for a moment, I almost succeeded. I almost walked away from it completely. But there's a difference between letting something go, and pretending you didn't notice it at all. And once I'd seen it, even if I didn't understand it yet, it stayed with me. Quiet. Unresolved. Like a question I didn't want to ask, but couldn't stop thinking about. I didn't find the truth all at once. It came together the way everything else had, slow, uneven, and hard to pin down at first. That small moment I couldn't shake, it didn't go away. If anything, it started pulling other things into focus. Things I had already seen but chosen not to hold on to. Now they felt different. Heavier. Like they were connected in a way I hadn't let myself consider before. I remember sitting there, going back through conversations in my head. Replaying small details. The pauses. The tone shifts. The things that didn't quite line up. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they started to feel like something I couldn't ignore anymore. And even then, I hesitated. There's a point where you know you're about to cross into something you can't come back from. Not physically. Mentally. Because once you confirm it, whatever it is, you lose the ability to go back to how things felt before. I stayed on that edge longer than I want to admit. Telling myself I didn't need to know. That knowing would only make things worse. But there's something about uncertainty that eats at you in a different way. It doesn't hurt all at once. It stretches the feeling out. Makes you question everything without giving you anything solid to hold on to. And eventually, that becomes harder than the truth. So I stopped avoiding it. Not all at once. Just enough to let things become clearer. And once I did, it wasn't complicated. That's the part that still gets me. I expected something dramatic. Something undeniable. Something that would feel like a clear line between before and after. But it wasn't like that. It was quiet. Simple. And final. I remember staring at it, waiting for my brain to catch up. For some kind of reaction. Anger. Shock. Anything. But what I felt first was, nothing. Just a kind of stillness. Like everything inside me paused at the same time. Because in that moment, it wasn't just about what I was seeing. It was everything that came with it. All the times I trusted without thinking. All the moments I dismissed. All the explanations I gave on her behalf. They all collapsed at once. Not loudly. Just, gone. I don't know how long I sat there before I said anything. When I finally did, it didn't come out the way I expected. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just asked. What is this? Even now, I can still hear how flat my voice sounded. Like I was asking about something that didn't matter. She didn't answer right away. There was that pause again. That same pause I had noticed before. Only now it felt different. Heavier. Because this time, I knew what it meant. It's not what you think, she said. I remember nodding, even though I hadn't said what I thought. Because part of me already knew that whatever explanation came next, it wasn't going to match what I was seeing. It didn't mean anything, she added. That was the first time something inside me actually reacted. Not anger. Just, confusion. Because I wasn't asking what it meant. I was trying to understand how it happened. And those are two very different things. We talked after that. Or at least, I think we did. It didn't feel like a conversation. More like pieces of one. Short sentences. Gaps in between. I'd ask something. She'd respond, but not fully. It wasn't serious. It just happened. I didn't think it would matter. Each answer felt like it was designed to make the situation smaller than it actually was. Like if she could shrink it enough, it wouldn't affect anything. But the more she said that, the more it didn't make sense. Because if it didn't matter, why hide it? That question stayed in my head, even when I didn't say it out loud. What I realized in that moment wasn't just that something had happened. It was that we weren't even standing in the same version of reality anymore. To me, everything had shifted. To her, it was something that could be explained away. Minimized. Contained. And that's where it broke. Not just the trust. Something deeper than that. Because I could have processed the truth, eventually. I could have worked through what actually happened. But I didn't know how to process being told that it wasn't a big deal. That my reaction was the problem. You're making this bigger than it is, she said at one point. And I remember just looking at her, trying to understand how we had arrived at two completely different conclusions from the same moment. That's when the doubt turned inward. Not about what I saw. But about how I was reacting to it. Was I overthinking it? Was I letting something small turn into something bigger than it needed to be? Those questions didn't feel natural. They felt placed. Like they came from somewhere outside of me. And still, I couldn't shake them. Because when someone you trust tells you something isn't serious, you want to believe them. Even when everything inside you says otherwise. And that's the part that stayed with me the most. Not the discovery itself. But how quickly I went from knowing something was wrong, to questioning whether I had the right to feel that way at all. If you've ever been in a situation where what you feel and what you're being told don't match, you already know how confusing that can get. And if this kind of story hits close to home, subscribe to Cheating Stories with Ray, like the video, and share it, because more people go through this than they ever talk about. Because once that disconnect starts, it doesn't just go away. It changes how you see everything that comes after. After that conversation, nothing felt stable anymore. Not the relationship. Not the situation. Not even my own thoughts. I kept going back to what she said. It wasn't serious. You're making it bigger than it is. Those words stuck in a way I didn't expect. Because part of me rejected them immediately. It didn't sit right. It didn't match what I felt. But another part of me held on to them. Not because I believed them, but because I didn't know what else to do. It created this split in my head. On one side, there was what I saw. What I felt the moment everything clicked into place. On the other side, there was what she was telling me it meant. And those two things didn't line up. I'd sit there, replaying it over and over. Trying to make them fit. Trying to adjust my reaction so it matched her version of events. Because if she was right, then this didn't have to be as serious as it felt. Then maybe everything didn't have to fall apart. That thought was hard to let go of. Not because it made sense. But because it was easier. Easier than accepting that something real had been broken. Easier than facing what that might mean long term. So I stayed in that space longer than I should have. Questioning myself instead of the situation. I'd think, maybe I'm overreacting. Then right after that, but why does it feel this bad if I am? That loop didn't stop. It just kept repeating. And the more it repeated, the less confident I became in my own reactions. I started watching myself more closely. Not her. Myself. Measuring my tone. My responses. Even my thoughts. Trying to make sure I wasn't being too much. Trying to stay calm. Reasonable. Controlled. Because that's who I had always been. The one who didn't overreact. The one who kept things steady. I didn't want to lose that. But the problem was, staying steady meant ignoring how unstable I actually felt. There were moments when I wanted to say exactly what I was thinking. To ask questions I knew I wasn't asking. But every time I got close, something stopped me. Not fear of her reaction. Something else. It was like I didn't fully trust my right to ask those questions. Like I needed to be sure, completely sure, before I could say anything. And I wasn't sure. Not in the way I thought I needed to be. Because every time I tried to hold on to what I felt, her words would come back. It didn't mean anything. It just happened. Those phrases had a way of shrinking everything. Making it feel like I was the one expanding it. Like I was the one turning something small into something heavy. And I didn't want to be that person. So instead of pushing outward, I turned inward. I started isolating myself inside my own head. Even when we were in the same space, I felt separate. Like I was carrying something she either couldn't see or refused to acknowledge. And that creates a kind of loneliness that's hard to explain. Because you're not alone. But you feel like you are. There were times I almost convinced myself to let it go. To just accept what she was saying and move forward. Pretend it didn't matter as much as it felt like it did. But every time I tried, something resisted. Not loudly. Just enough to stop me from fully committing to that version of things. And that resistance came with a question I couldn't answer. If it really wasn't a big deal, why couldn't I make it feel like one? Why did it keep coming back? Why did it still feel unresolved, no matter how many times I tried to minimize it? That's when I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. I wasn't just dealing with what happened. I was dealing with the fact that I didn't trust my own reaction to it. And that's a different kind of problem. Because when you lose trust in someone else, at least you know where the break is. When you lose trust in yourself, everything becomes uncertain. Every thought feels questionable. Every feeling feels like it needs to be checked, confirmed, validated. And I didn't have that validation. Not from her. And not from anywhere else. So I stayed stuck in that space. Half convinced I was right. Half convinced I was making something out of nothing. And the worst part was, I didn't know which version of me to believe. I don't remember deciding to reach out to anyone. It wasn't planned. It just happened. One night, everything felt louder than usual. Not around me, inside my head. The same thoughts, looping again, but this time I couldn't quiet them down. I had already gone through it 100 times. What happened? What she said? What I felt? None of it lined up. And I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit up to that point. I didn't trust myself to make the call. Not fully. I needed something outside of me to confirm what I was feeling, or tell me I was wrong. So I sat there, alone, staring at my phone longer than I needed to. Not doing anything at first. Just holding it. Because once I put it into words, once I let someone else see it, it would become real in a different way. Up until then, everything had stayed contained between us. Even with all the confusion, it was still something private. Something I could keep controlled, in a way. But the moment I shared it, I was letting go of that. Eventually, I started typing. At first, it felt strange. Trying to explain something I didn't fully understand myself. I kept stopping. Rewriting. Deleting parts that felt too emotional. Adding details that made it sound more reasonable. I didn't want to sound like I was overreacting. Even to strangers. Especially to strangers. Because if they saw it that way, then maybe she was right. That thought stayed in the back of my mind the entire time. I wasn't just telling a story. I was presenting a case. Carefully choosing what to include, what to leave out. Trying to make it as balanced as possible. As fair as possible. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted clarity. At least, that's what I told myself. But looking back, I think I was looking for something else. I was looking for permission. Permission to feel like this mattered. Permission to stop minimizing it. Permission to trust my own reaction. When I finally posted it, I didn't feel relief. Just a different kind of tension. Like I had handed something over and now I had to wait to see what came back. At first, nothing happened. Then slowly, responses started coming in. One. Then a few more. Then more than I expected. By the time I checked again, there were dozens. Then hundreds. Then more than I could keep up with. And they didn't agree. That's what I remember the most. I thought I'd get one clear answer. Something consistent. But instead, it was all over the place. Some people were direct. You should leave. No question. Others went the opposite direction. It's not that serious. Work through it. Then there were the ones who didn't even focus on the situation. They focused on me. You stayed too long. You're overthinking. You're being weak. That part caught me off guard. Because suddenly, it wasn't just about what happened anymore. It was about how I handled it. And that pulled me even deeper into it. I kept scrolling. Reading everything. Even the comments that didn't sit right. Especially those. Because I was still trying to figure out which ones matched what I was supposed to feel. There were moments where something someone said would hit. A sentence that lined up perfectly with what I had been thinking but hadn't been able to say. And for a second, I'd feel it. Relief. Like, okay. I'm not crazy. Like someone else could see it too. But that feeling didn't last. Because right after that, I'd read something completely different. Something that made me question it again. And just like that, the certainty disappeared. It became noise. Too many voices. Too many opinions. All of them confident. All of them contradicting each other. And none of them actually living in my reality. That's when it started to shift. What felt like validation at first, started to feel disconnected. Because these people weren't sitting where I was sitting. They weren't hearing the tone in her voice. They weren't seeing the way things actually felt in real time. They were reacting to a version of events I had put together. And even that version, I wasn't sure was complete. I had filtered it. Adjusted it. Tried to make it make sense. So what were they really responding to? That thought stayed with me. And slowly, I started to realize something I hadn't seen at the beginning. I wasn't asking them what to do. Not really. I was asking them to tell me that what I felt was justified. That I wasn't overreacting. That I had a right to feel betrayed. And the problem with that is, not everyone is going to give you the same answer. Especially when they're not the ones who have to live with it. So I sat there, reading through all of it, trying to pull something solid out of something that wasn't solid at all. And the more I read, the less clear everything became. Because instead of getting closer to an answer, I started to feel even further away from one. After a while, I stopped reading. Not because I had an answer, but because none of it felt like it applied anymore. It was strange how quickly everything online started to feel distant. At first, those opinions carried weight. I held on to them, compared them, tried to measure myself against them. But when I looked up from my phone, none of that followed me into the room. She was still there. The same person. The same voice. The same presence I had built my life around. And suddenly, everything felt more complicated again. Because it's easy to read a sentence that says, just walk away. It's a lot harder to do that when the person is standing a few feet away, acting like things can still be normal. She didn't act like everything was fine exactly. But she didn't act like everything was broken either. Somewhere in between. That space where things aren't addressed directly, but aren't ignored completely. And that made it harder. Because there was no clear direction. No moment where it felt like things had fully collapsed. Just this ongoing tension that sat between us. We'd talk, but not really about it. Small conversations. Surface-level things. Every now and then, it would come up. Not in a way that resolved anything. More like, revisiting the same points without moving forward. It didn't mean anything, she'd say again. Or, I don't understand why this is still such a big deal. And every time I heard that, something in me tightened. Not because it was new. But because it hadn't changed. The situation hadn't changed. My reaction hadn't changed. But somehow, it still felt like I was expected to adjust. To settle into it. To move past it without fully processing it. And I tried. I really did. There were moments where I thought maybe I could just let it go. Focus on everything else. On what we had built. On what still existed. Because none of that disappeared overnight. The structure of our life was still there. The routines. The responsibilities. The things that didn't stop just because something shifted underneath them. And those things matter. More than people realize. They don't just disappear because something goes wrong. They keep going. Which means you have to keep going too. And that creates a kind of pressure. Not from anyone else. Just from the reality of everything tied together. There were nights where everything felt almost normal again. Where we'd sit in the same space, talk about ordinary things, and for a moment, it felt like maybe things hadn't changed as much as I thought. Like maybe this could be something we move past. But those moments didn't last. Because the second things got quiet, it came back. That same unresolved feeling. That same question I couldn't answer. And it made everything feel temporary. Like I was just delaying something instead of actually dealing with it. That's when I realized something I hadn't fully accepted before. Nothing online could make this decision for me. No comment. No opinion. No outside perspective. Because none of them had to sit in this space. None of them had to carry what this felt like day to day. They weren't the ones hearing the same explanations repeated. They weren't the ones trying to reconcile what happened with what still existed. They weren't the ones waking up and realizing that the problem didn't disappear overnight. And that's when the weight really settled in. Not just of what happened, but of what came next. Because whatever I chose, I had to live with it. Not just for a moment, but every day after. And that kind of responsibility doesn't feel clear. It doesn't come with certainty. It just sits there, waiting for you to decide what matters more. What you can live with. What you can't. And the hardest part was realizing that no one else could answer that for me. Not her. Not the people online. Not anyone. Which meant that, for the first time since all of this started, I had to stop asking what I was supposed to do. And start facing the fact that I already knew what it felt like to stay. It had been long enough that I stopped expecting to see her again. Not in any real way. She'd become something distant. Not completely gone, but no longer part of my day-to-day life. Just a name that came up less and less, until eventually it didn't come up at all. That's why it caught me off guard when she reached out. It wasn't anything dramatic. Just a message. Hey. Can we talk? I stared at it longer than I should have. Not because I didn't know what it meant, but because I wasn't sure what version of me would respond to it. The one who used to listen? Or the one who had learned to stop? I didn't answer right away. I let it sit. But eventually, I agreed. We met somewhere neutral. No history attached to it. No shared memories. When I saw her, the first thing I noticed was how different she felt. Not just physically. Quieter. Like the energy she used to carry had been worn down into something more careful. She didn't rush into anything. No immediate explanations. No attempt to fill the silence. She just sat there for a moment and said, "I didn't know if you'd come." I shrugged a little. I wasn't sure if I would. That seemed to land. She nodded, like she understood something in that. For a while, the conversation stayed surface level. Small things. Safe things. Until it didn't. "I messed everything up," she said eventually. Not emotional. Not dramatic. Just direct. I didn't respond right away. I let her keep going. "I thought I knew what I was doing," she said. "I thought I was choosing something better." There was a pause. I wasn't. I watched her as she said it. Trying to figure out if it felt real, or if it was just something she'd been telling herself long enough that it sounded convincing. "I lost a lot," she added. "More than I expected." I nodded slightly, but I didn't ask what that meant. Part of me didn't need the details. Part of me didn't want them. She looked at me then, more directly. I didn't realize what I had until it was gone. That line should have meant something. At another point in my life, it would have. But sitting there, hearing it now, it felt different. Not empty. Just late. I could feel that old instinct in me trying to come back. The part that listens. The part that understands. The part that tries to make space for someone else's regret. I let her talk. About how things fell apart. How the situation she chose didn't turn out the way she thought it would. How people distanced themselves. How it got harder than she expected to carry everything that came with her decision. I didn't interrupt. I always listened too much. At one point, she said quietly, "I know I don't deserve anything from you." And for the first time, I spoke without thinking about how it would land. "Then why are you here?" She didn't answer immediately. She looked down for a second, then back at me. I thought maybe we could try again. There it was. Not hidden. Not softened. Just said. And everything went quiet for a moment. If you've ever had someone come back after everything fell apart, you already know how complicated that moment is. Before we go further, take a second to subscribe to Cheating Stories with Ray, like the video, and drop a comment. Would you hear them out, or walk away? I'm curious what you'd do. I sat there, looking at her, trying to understand what I was feeling. Because it wasn't anger. It wasn't even hurt in the way it used to be. It was something steadier than that. Something clearer. She started to explain more. I know things wouldn't be the same, she said. I'm not expecting that. I nodded slowly. That's the only thing I'm sure about, I said. She hesitated. I know I made the wrong choice. There was something honest in the way she said it. But honesty doesn't undo anything. That's something I understood now. I leaned back slightly, taking a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. For a second, I thought about what it would look like to say yes. To go back. To try to rebuild something from what was left. And I realized I wasn't thinking about it the way I used to. Not from a place of wanting her back. But from a place of understanding what it would cost. That's when I knew the decision was already made. I just hadn't said it yet.